The waiting room was stark and silent, except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Rows of plastic chairs stood empty, save for a handful of anxious faces, mother clutching a faded photo, father staring at his phone screen, siblings whispering prayers under their breath. I sat near the window, heart pounding, as the mid-afternoon sun cast long shadows across the linoleum floor. Outside, a snow squall threatened to swallow the hospital in a white veil, mirroring the cold dread that seeped into my bones. A nurse in crisp scrubs approached with a clipboard. Her footsteps seemed impossibly loud in the hush. She stopped in front of me, cleared her throat and said, "We have the latest confirmation list for Flight AC237, names of passengers accounted for. I'm sorry for everything." My breath caught in my throat. I leaned forward, bracing my elbows on my knees, eyes fixed on the paper she held. The white sheet was cruelly simple, a column of names stamped "confirmed" in bold type. A lifeline or a tombstone, depending on which way fate tipped. One by one, she recited names of the living. Each syllable felt like a small cut, a reminder of those who had slipped through that stormy night without a trace. Michael Chen. Confirmed. I let out a shaky breath. Lila Andrews. Confirmed. Relief flickered, then died. Jacob Singh. Confirmed. My pulse thudded. And then Emma Sullivan. I sat up straighter. My sister's name, the one I had clung to in every prayer, rang like a bell in my ears, only it didn't appear on the list. No, Emma Sullivan. Confirmed. The nurse's lips trembled, as if she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, but never for me. My voice barely rose above a whisper. "What about Emma Sullivan?" The nurse's gaze dropped to her clipboard. Her cheeks reddened, and she swallowed hard. "Her name isn't on the confirmed list." Silence engulfed me. A hollow ache spread through my chest, like the space between two breaking bones. If she had been confirmed alive, her name would be right there, just like the others. But it wasn't. I remembered the night of the crash with painful clarity, the violent shudder as the plane hit turbulence over Lake Superior, the anguished screams in the cabin, the sharp jolt when the engine sputtered and died. I'd been strapped into my seat, heart racing, while Emma had sat a row ahead, head bent over her sketchbook. We were returning to Toronto after a family reunion in Winnipeg, just one quick hop back home. But the storm had come too fast, and the plane had bucked like a wild animal. In those final moments, I had closed my eyes and reached for her hand, but the jerk of impact had pulled us apart. Then darkness. Now, hours later, I sat in this cold room and stared at the truth. The list didn't include her. It meant she was still unaccounted for, missing. Somewhere between shards of memory and the icy depths of the lake. The nurse handed me the paper. My fingers shook as I took it, the ink smudging under my tear-brimmed eyes. I scanned down and down, hoping to find her name at the bottom, some forgotten entry, some last-minute miracle. But the list ended, and there was no Emma Sullivan. Around me, the family members began to murmur. Some wept, some hugged. But I felt paralyzed, caught between hope and despair. I pressed the list to my chest, feeling its weight like a lifeline slipping through my fingers. Then I felt it, a spark of determination. If her name wasn't on the confirmed list, then the story wasn't over. There were questions yet to be answered, clues to be chased. I would not rest until I knew where she was, whether she was alive, clinging to life somewhere, or lost to the depths. I folded the list carefully, stood up, and turned to face the others in the room. My voice, when it came, was steady. "I'm going to find her." For the first time since the crash, I felt something stronger than fear, resolve. The next morning dawned in muted grays, the sky heavy with the promise of another squall. I pulled my coat tight against the early chill and stepped outside the hospital, the frozen ground crunching underfoot. My breath rose in white plumes as I hailed a cab, the driver glancing at me through the rearview mirror with a mix of sympathy and curiosity. I told him to go to the Joint Rescue Coordination Center in Trenton, Ontario, the hub where all information on Flight AC237's fate was flowing in. Inside the austere building, worn linoleum floors and fluorescent lights gave everything a clinical feel. Maps of the Great Lakes region plastered the walls, dotted with pins and strings tracing the last known path of the aircraft. A stern-looking officer in a navy blue uniform led me past rows of desks where air traffic controllers and marine coordinators spoke into headsets, eyes flicking between radar screens and weather reports. "Family member?" he asked, his voice measured. I nodded and handed him the folded confirmation list. "I'm Emma Sullivan's brother," I said. Her name didn't appear. His eyes softened. "Right. We've got no confirmed sightings of her life raft, no personal effects recovered, but the lake is vast. The storm was brutal. We're doing everything we can." He tapped at a keyboard and pulled up a live feed of search zones: Sector Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, colored in red and yellow, where icebreakers, helicopters and dive teams combed the icy waters. My finger hovered over the screen as if I could point to Emma's exact position, but the coordinates blurred together, meaningless in their abstraction. He handed me a laminated printout, a grid showing where debris had washed ashore along the Manitowoc coast and where sonar pings had detected possible wreckage. "The plane's black boxes are still submerged, lodged under a shelf of ice at about 150 meters, he explained. "We lost 2 divers last night to hypothermia. It's treacherous." I swallowed hard, the weight of each word pressing down on me. "Can I see the debris sighting reports? Anything that might have a name, like a bag tag or a piece of jewelry?" His brow furrowed. "We've recovered personal items, a pilot's watch, a fragment of a textbook with a student's name, and 1 shoe that matched a young woman's size, but nothing with your sister's initials." A cold wash of nausea swept through me. Every recovered artifact was a story half told, a physical echo of lives shattered. Emma's absence in those reports was like a void, a silence amid the chaos. The officer paused. "We have 1 lead," he said quietly, "from a fisherman about 50 kilometers south. He heard a faint SOS on marine band radio around midnight. Could have been a mayday from a life raft." He slid a piece of paper across the desk, coordinates and a sketch of what looked like a small orange raft spotted drifting towards Manitowoc Island. "We haven't been able to recover it yet." My heart thudded so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. "Can I join the search team?" I asked before I could stop myself. He studied me for a long moment. "You're not trained," he said gently. "It's too dangerous." But then he sighed. "We could use someone who knows her habits, where she might have stashed emergency supplies, what direction she would swim if she made it off the wing. If you insist, you can come along, but only as an observer." I didn't hesitate. "Tell me when. Tell me where. I'll be there." By noon, I found myself aboard a Coast Guard icebreaker, the CCGS Griffin, cutting a path through pancake ice churned into slush by the vessel's reinforced bow. The sun glinted off diamond-like crystals as they scattered across the deck. Crew members in orange survival suits moved with purpose, hauling ropes and adjusting sonar equipment. I watched them work, every motion precise, every breath visible in the cold air. A young sonar technician handed me a set of headphones. "Want to listen?" he asked. Through the static hiss, I heard nothing but the thrum of machinery. Then sharp and clear, 3 rapid pulses, the telltale knock of the black box locator beacon. Each ping felt like a heartbeat, urgent and alive. "That's Sector Delta, about 2 kilometers below," he said. "We've locked on but can't dive until conditions calm." But that ping 3 times means the box is still transmitting. My pulse raced. If the black box yielded its secrets, it could tell us exactly what happened in those last seconds before impact, and maybe where survivors ended up. As we approached the coordinate, the sky darkened and snow began to fall in fat flakes. The deck became slick. The officer in charge barked orders: "Lower the submersible drone, monitor ice pressure, keep an eye on the horizon." I steadied myself against the railing, breath fogging in the wind, and thought of Emma's laughter when she sketched sunsets, how she once told me that art captured truth better than words ever could. If the drone could retrieve even a fragment of the fuselage, maybe I could find a clue inscribed on a panel or painted seat number that corresponded to her row. Hours later, the drone's robotic arms clamped onto a twisted section of the cabin floor. The live feed showed warped metal and a tangle of wires. I held my breath, each second stretching into eternity. Then the drone's camera revealed a seatback pocket, emblazoned with the airline's logo, and nestled inside, a waterproof bag, zippered shut. The technician's voice trembled as he maneuvered the claw to open it. I leaned forward, heart pounding. The bag unzipped with a hiss. Inside, an emergency flashlight, a ration pack, and, glimmering faintly, a silver pendant. I recognized its engraved initials, ES. Tears welled in my eyes as I reached for the gear, my gloved hand shaking. Emma's life raft supplies. The world narrowed to that moment, hope rekindled, anguish colliding with relief. She had loaded her kit, she had prepared to survive. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'm coming for you, Em." The pendant felt impossibly heavy in my gloved hand, its cool weight a tether between hope and despair. We secured the recovered bag in a protective case below deck, and I followed the crew onto the bridge, where wind-whipped snow lashed the windows and the Griffin plowed onward. Each pulse from the black box locator reverberated through my chest like a ticking clock. Emma was alive somewhere under the ice-cold lake, or she had been. Now we had to find her supplies, and if fate allowed, rescue her before the cold claimed her. "Holding position," the officer announced, fingers dancing over the console. The Griffin's engines coughed and idled as they centered on the pinging source. Outside, the water churned in angry swirls, and jagged sheets of ice scraped against the hull. A second submersible drone descended into the dark, its lights cutting a narrow beam through the gloom. I watched the monitor as sediment clouds dispersed to reveal twisted fragments of cabin floor and insulation. Every inch of this wreck was a puzzle piece we needed to reconstruct. Suddenly, the drone's camera caught sight of something bright orange wedged between two panels, the edge of a life raft canopy. My pulse thundered so loud I could barely think. "There!" I shouted. The technician adjusted the arm, pried the canopy loose, and guided the raft into view. It floated, collapsed but intact, its bright fabric folded and tethered to the fuselage by a dull metal clip. "Unfolding it now," the technician said. On screen, we watched as the drone's claw released the clip. The raft popped open, its canopy ballooning outward in a silent, graceful bloom. Through the drone's lights, I could see the rippled plastic floor, the straps for securing survivors, and 3 ration packs tucked into a corner, Emma's supplies. I closed my eyes and exhaled, tears freezing at the corners. But there was no sign of her. No footprints on the canopy, no handprints on the straps. It was as if she had left in a hurry, or worse, that the raft had drifted away after she bailed out. We had to act now. "Prepare boats," the officer ordered. Within minutes, 2 rigid-hulled inflatable boats were lowered into the frigid water. I changed into a survival suit borrowed from the crew, the neoprene and thermal layers constricting until I could barely breathe. My throat tightened as I slid into the boat, the cold biting through the rubber. A crewman helped me aboard and checked my life jacket. His eyes were grave but kind. As we sped toward the last known coordinates, my mind drifted back to Emma's laughter the night before we boarded the plane. She'd been sketching the sunrise, her long hair loose about her shoulders. "Promise me," she'd said, dabbing a smear of orange paint on the page, "that no matter what happens, you'll chase your dreams." I had laughed and hugged her, not knowing those would be our last words. Now the wind whipped snow into my face, the spray stinging my cheeks as the boat skidded across a field of ice floes. The crewman at the bow called out distances and bearings, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. The icebreaker's massive forms receded into the storm, leaving us alone in a white wilderness. We reached the patch of open water where the radar had picked up the pinging. The raft's canopy bobbed just above the surface, battered but recognizable. I stood, heart hammering, and reached for the nearest strap. My gloves slipped, the cold made my fingers clumsy. The crewman shot me a glance and extended a hand, helping me pull myself onto the canopy. The fabric quivered under my weight, and I sank a little before the sealed chambers held firm. I crawled to the center and knelt beside the ration packs, heart pounding so violently I thought it might break free. I pried one open, and the stale oatmeal inside spilled over the floor. I pressed my hand into the soft granules, imagining Emma's fingers had done the same. Somewhere deep below, she had clung to the hope that someone would find this raft and come for her. "Search the area," the crewman called, peering across the ice. I scanned the horizon, spotting a tuft of something dark tangled in a broken branch of ice ahead, 2 meters away. Adrenaline surged through me as I slid off the raft canopy and into the icy water up to my waist. A pain shot through my legs as the frigid water closed around me, but I waded forward, eyes fixed on the shape. When I reached it, I knelt on the frozen ledge and looked down. Emma's waterproof sketchbook, its cover stained with lake water and edged with ice crystals. My breath caught. I scooped it up and flipped it open. Her pencil drawings of our family, her notes about assembling the raft, the coordinates she'd jotted down in case of emergency. On the last page, she had drawn a small map, 3 kilometers east from the wreck site, toward the northern shore, where a cluster of rocks might offer shelter. I stared at the map, the blood pounding in my ears. This was her sign, her plan to survive. I shouted above the wind, "She's alive, or she was. We have to move east, now!" The crewman and I clambered back onto the inflatable boat, soaking and stiff, but determined. As the engine roared to life, I clutched Emma's sketchbook to my chest. Her faith in me, her belief that I would come, burned brighter than the gale. We raced across the icy expanse, each wave threatening to capsize us, each breath a battle against the cold. But nothing mattered except finding her. Nothing mattered except the promise I had made, to chase her dreams, to bring her home. The inflatable skidded across the fractured ice, sending sprays of icy water skyward that sparkled briefly before vanishing into the grey sky. The Griffin's silhouette shrank behind us as we pressed on, Emma's sketchbook clutched in my arms like a lifeline. My fingers, numb from the cold, traced the pencil-drawn map she had left, a promise etched on thin paper that guided me toward the northern shore. Every minute felt like an hour. The boat bumped over ice floes, its hull groaning as we navigated around thicker sheets. The wind roared through my hood, stealing my breath, but I kept my eyes fixed on the distant bluff where the cliffs met the frozen edge of the lake. In the sketch, Emma had drawn 3 jagged rocks jutting from the snow, a landmark as unmistakable as her handwriting. We reached the coordinates just as the late afternoon sun, pale and distant, slipped behind the clouds. The temperature plummeted and the boat's engines sputtered as if protesting the bitter cold. The crewman pointed to a narrow inlet, carved between towering ice walls. There, half buried in drifts, lay the 3 rocks, tipped like ancient sentinels watching over the shore. I slid off the raft and onto the ice, testing its weight with 1 foot. The surface held, thick ice layered with snow and frost. I squinted at the rocks, then at the shoreline beyond. It was a half-kilometer trek over treacherous ground, but I had to try. Water lapped at the icy lip below, the dark depths revealing nothing of what lurked beneath. Drawing a deep breath, I began to move. Each step was deliberate. Probe with a pole, test for hollow spots, shift weight slowly. My survival suit resisted, the neoprene stiffening with cold. Snow crunched under each booted foot, and the wind howled through the rock crevices, carrying a mournful echo of Emma's laughter. Halfway across, I spotted footprints in the snow, faint, uneven prints that cracked the surface ice. My heart leaped. I knelt and touched the print with gloved fingers, feeling the ridges of tread that matched Emma's hiking boots. She had made it this far. She had been here. "Over here!" I called to the crewman who guided the boat closer, ice clinking against the hull. He lowered a rope ladder that I used to reboard, pulling myself in and pointing toward a shallow bluff where the snow was trampled, the wind-swept patterns interrupted by human passage. We tied the boat and climbed the rocky slope, the wind blasting us as if to drive us back. The rocks provided minimal shelter, but I noticed fresh scuffs on the ice, drag marks where someone must have crawled for cover. My breath caught. I followed the marks into a small recess carved by the elements. Inside, the temperature was marginally warmer, the wind's fury muted. There, half hidden under a tattered emergency blanket, lay a dark shape. I froze, dread and hope warring in my chest. "Emma?" I whispered. She stirred, eyelids fluttering, and I dropped to my knees beside her. Her face was streaked with frost and fatigue, her lips blue but moving as she murmured something I couldn't catch. I shook her gently, relief flooding through me so powerful it blurred my vision. Her eyes opened, and for a moment we just stared at each other, two souls reunited against impossible odds. She tried to sit up, pain and dizziness crossing her features. I supported her, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. Her survival suit had preserved her core warmth, but exhaustion had overtaken her. I checked her ration pack. 1 bar left, a few sips of melted ice water in a cracked flask. She had rationed everything, waiting for rescue. Tears blurred my sight as I squeezed her hand. "I found you," I said, voice thick. "I promised." She managed a small, weary smile. "You kept your promise." Behind us, the crewman set up a small stove to melt snow and revitalize a heater. Within minutes, warmth began to seep into the pocket of the cave. He laid out a thermal blanket for Emma to lie on and handed me hot water in a flask. I warmed her hands and guided her to sip slowly, watching color return to her cheeks. Minutes felt like hours as she regained strength. Every breath she took was a victory, proof that hope could survive even the coldest depths. When she could speak more clearly, she told me how she had managed those long hours, how she had shivered, drawn the blanket tight, envisioned my face to keep panic at bay, even sketched our family portrait in her mind until she found the clarity to mark those coordinates. I listened, my heart pounding with pride and grief for the ordeal she had endured. Around us, the snow fell silently, as if granting a moment of peace. As the rescue team prepared to transport her back to the Griffin, I sat beside her, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "You're safe now," I murmured. She closed her eyes, exhaustion winning the battle as she drifted between consciousness and sleep. I stood and turned to the crewman. "Thank you," I said, voice thick with emotion. He nodded and helped secure her onto a sled. We would carry her back over the ice, then onto the icebreaker, and finally to the hospital for treatment. As I followed behind, my heart both heavy and full, I realized that this was only the beginning. Questions still loomed about how she had survived, what messages the black boxes would reveal, and how we would rebuild after such trauma. But for now, she was alive, and that was enough. The Griffin's infirmary was a small, Spartan space, white walls, stainless steel trays, and the steady hum of medical equipment. Emma lay on a narrow cot, her breathing even under a thin blanket. I sat beside her, my hand cradling hers, as a flight nurse checked her vitals. Outside the porthole, the icy expanse of Lake Superior stretched to the horizon, a reminder of what she had endured. "Stable," the nurse announced. "She's hypothermic and dehydrated, but no broken bones. We'll transfer her to Thunder Bay General as soon as we dock." Relief and exhaustion washed over me. Emma's eyelids fluttered, and she turned her head toward me, her eyes full of questions and wonder. "What happened?" she whispered. "You survived," I said, voice thick. "The submersible found your raft and supplies. We followed your map and footprints. You sheltered in a cave by those 3 rocks. You're safe now." Tears welled in her eyes. I thought I wouldn't last the night." "You did," I reminded her softly. "And I came for you." Her hand squeezed mine before the nurse gently guided her to rest. I finally allowed myself a moment to breathe. This chapter of terror was over, but the journey ahead, unraveling the crash's mysteries and healing our shattered lives, was only beginning. Days later, back in Toronto, the Sullivan family home buzzed with subdued hysteria. Relatives and friends filled the living room, wrapped in blankets, clutching mugs of tea. Emma reclined on the couch, a heated blanket across her lap and a faint flush returning to her cheeks. My parents hovered nearby, their relief tinged with lasting worry. A television in the corner displayed the latest news, footage of the Griffin's recovery operation, interviews with Coast Guard officers, and blurred images of the submerged cabin. A scroll at the bottom listed the confirmed survivors. For the first time, Emma's name appeared beneath missing, now reclassified as rescued. Our mother let out a shaky laugh, tears streaming down her face. She rose and embraced Emma, rocking her gently. "My baby," she sobbed. "My baby." Emma smiled weakly, resting her head on Mum's shoulder. My father, usually stoic, wiped his eyes before wrapping both of them in a hug. I stood back, heart full, as cameras from a local news crew peered through the window. We had said no interviews. This victory was ours alone. Later, when the house quieted and the guests departed, Emma and I sat by the fireplace, 2 mugs of hot cocoa warming our hands. The flames danced, casting flickering shadows across her face. "How does it feel?" I asked quietly. "Unbelievable," she admitted. "Like I'm living someone else's story." I nodded. "You are. But you lived it." She took a sip of cocoa and set the mug aside. "I keep replaying it in my head," she said. "Every moment, when the plane went down, in the raft, the cold. I saw so many things. I thought I saved some sketches, but the book got waterlogged." I reached into my backpack and pulled out a wet bundle of papers, pages from her sketchbook she'd torn out and sealed in a plastic bag. "We rescued these underwater," I said. "Sonar cameras spotted them floating near the raft. They're fragile, but I think they can be restored." Her eyes lit with hope. "I need those," she whispered. "They're part of the story." I nodded. "They're yours." She closed her eyes. "Thank you for every step you took, even when you didn't know if I was alive." I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. There was never a choice. Outside, the night deepened. The fire crackled, and the world, once so vast and terrifying, felt contained within these walls. But the echo of the storm still lingered. The pending investigation into the crash, the questions about the black boxes, the healing our family would undertake. Emma opened her eyes and studied me. "What's next?" she asked. I paused. "We find out how it happened. We tell the world what you endured. And then we heal." She nodded, determination shining in her gaze. "Together." I smiled and raised my mug. "Together." We clinked our mugs softly, the sound a promise of truth, of recovery, and of the unbreakable bond forged in the ice-cold depths of Lake Superior. The morning after Emma's return to solid ground, the Sullivan house felt eerily quiet, as though the storm that had raged across Lake Superior had swept away not only the season's last snow, but also every fragment of normalcy. I woke before dawn, the orange glow of streetlights filtering through the curtains. Emma was still asleep, her breathing steady, the soft rise and fall of her chest a testament to her resilience. I dressed quietly, pulling on a thick parka and woolen gloves, and slipped into the living room where the mahogany coffee table groaned under stacks of documents. Preliminary reports from the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, weather logs, radar charts, and transcripts of air traffic control communications. My father sat in the armchair, dark circles under his eyes, studying the same materials. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose without looking at me. "Did you hear back from Trenton?" I asked, voice hushed. He shook his head. "They're waiting on the flight data recorder. The submersible drone had to retreat when the storm picked up again. No word yet on the cockpit voice recorder." His tone was grim, as though each moment without answers was another blow. I sank into the couch beside him. We spoke little. The documents spoke for themselves. On radar, Flight AC237's final moments were recorded as a rapid descent, an extreme drop of 8,000 feet in under a minute, followed by a sudden loss of transponder signal. The weather logs confirmed the squall line had intensified unexpectedly, winds gusting to over 120 kilometers per hour right along the plane's flight path. But the black boxes would reveal the cockpit conversations, whether the pilots had time to declare an emergency, what alarms sounded, and most importantly, why the aircraft had been unable to maintain altitude. Without that data, we could only speculate, and speculation felt like betrayal to the memory of those still unaccounted for. I took Emma's sketchbook, now partially restored by a conservator, and flipped to her map page. Below it, in her cramped handwriting, she'd jotted down snippets of what she remembered from the raft. The distant roar of engines, a faint clicking that she thought might be her life vest inflating, and the way the canopy had fluttered when the drone lights illuminated it. Each recollection became a clue, a piece of the puzzle we needed to present to the investigators. By mid-morning, the family attorney arrived, brief and professional. He laid out our options: private inquiry or waiting for the official report, potential civil suits against the airline, media interviews to raise awareness about safety protocols. He spoke in legalese, but I realized his purpose: to shield us from being exploited by tabloids looking for sensational angles. Emma stirred on the couch, wincing as she sat up. I jumped to her side, helping her adjust the heating pad on her shoulder. She gave a small, grateful smile and asked quietly, "Are they talking about lawsuits?" "No," I said firmly. "Right now, I just want to know why this happened." She nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. "Then let's help them find out." The following afternoon, the driveway was packed with journalists, cars, and satellite trucks, their antennas skirting the tops of maple trees. A local news crew had gotten wind of our decision to cooperate with the Transportation Safety Board, TSB, to help expedite the investigation. Although we had declined on-camera interviews, we agreed to meet the lead TSB investigator, Captain Claire Tremblay, at a nearby community hall. Inside, the hall's fluorescent lights flickered above rows of empty folding chairs. Captain Tremblay stood at the front, her navy blue uniform crisp, the TSB crest polished on her sleeve. Her voice was calm but authoritative as she explained the investigation's scope: recovery of both black boxes, examination of wreckage debris, metallurgical analysis of any structural failure, and review of weather forecasting procedures. She stressed the timeline: 9 to 12 months before a final report, but promised preliminary findings within 6 weeks. When it was my turn, I handed her Emma's partially restored sketches and the ration pack with her pendant. She remembered these details, I said, and the footprints on the ice, anything that can help reconstruct the timeline. Captain Tremblay accepted the items respectfully. She leafed through the sketches, eyes narrowing. "These are invaluable," she said. "Survivor recollections often fill gaps that instruments can't. We'll catalogue every detail." Emma spoke then, voice soft but firm. "I want to tell you exactly what I heard in the raft. The clicks, the roar, the way the wind shifted. It might correspond to specific mechanical failures or impact sequences." Tremblay nodded. "We'll record your testimony officially. We're here to work with you, not against you." Back home, the afternoon sun slanted through the living room windows, but inside, the air felt taut with tension. I opened the binder containing the transcripts of Emma's recorded statement. She described a sudden jolt seconds before the descent, a metallic screech she couldn't place, and then a long silence before the raft's canopy cracked open. Each phrase she'd spoken was now transcribed word for word. As I organized my notes, my phone buzzed with a message from the Coast Guard. The second black box, the cockpit voice recorder, had been retrieved in the early hours of the morning. They were transferring it to the TSB lab in Ottawa for analysis. My heart pounded. Within days, we would know what the pilot said, what alarms blared, and perhaps whether there had been a mechanical fault or a human error. I shut the binder and looked out the window at the bare maple branches, their limbs etched against a slate sky. The same sky that had betrayed us on that fateful night. How could something so beautiful also be so merciless? Emma emerged from her room, wrapped in a plush robe. She held her sketchbook to her chest. "I want to help with the public hearing," she said. "I'll testify if they ask." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but I'm proud of you." She smiled faintly. "I feel like I wasn't just lucky. I was chosen. Maybe my story can keep this from happening again." Hope flickered in my chest. The path forward was uncertain, fraught with bureaucratic hurdles and cold data. But together, with each testimony and each recovered fragment, we were reclaiming the narrative. We were turning tragedy into a force for change. And that, I realized as I watched Emma stand tall despite her ordeal, was the true rescue, not just saving a life, but saving the memory of what she endured and ensuring no one else would suffer the same fate. A week later, the community hall in Ottawa had been transformed into an austere hearing room, its folding chairs replaced by polished wooden benches and a long table draped in the TSB's blue banner. The air was thick with anticipation as survivors' families, airline representatives, legal counsel and media assembled under the harsh glare of overhead lights. Emma and I arrived early, slipping through a side door to avoid cameras. I steadied my breath, the leather-bound testimony binder clutched in my hands like a talisman. Emma's arm brushed mine, and I offered a reassuring nod. She returned it with a small, determined smile. At precisely 9 a.m., the doors swung open and Captain Claire Tremblay entered, flanked by 2 investigators. She took her seat at the head of the table, microphone poised. "Good morning," she began, voice calm yet authoritative. "Today, we will hear testimony related to Flight AC237 on January 18, 2025. Our goal is to understand the sequence of events leading to the accident and develop recommendations to prevent recurrence." She scanned the room, her gaze warming as it settled on Emma. "Ms. Sullivan, when you're ready, please proceed." Emma rose, her posture straight despite the tremor in her hands. She approached the microphone, the hush in the room amplifying every rustle of her clothing. I watched her profile, pale skin, dark hair pinned back, eyes determined. She took a breath, looking down at her notes. "I remember the moment the plane shuddered," she began, voice steady but quiet. "It was like hitting a wall of wind. The cabin lurched violently, and the overhead bins rattled. I heard a loud screech, metal grinding, just before the lights flickered out." Her voice wavered and she paused, eyes closing as if she could feel the turbulence again. I squeezed her hand at my knee, offering silent support. "They must have hit a micro-burst," Captain Tremblay interjected gently. Emma nodded and continued. "Then I heard a click, like a latch releasing. It wasn't from my life vest. It was deeper, possibly the canopy release mechanism on the emergency slide. A split second later, we dropped so fast, I was sure we would never stop falling." She inhaled, and I saw a flicker of pain cross her face. After impact, everything was chaos. I remember the cold water rushing in, the canopy twisting around me. I grabbed my raft kit and inflated it, partly because I still thought I'd be alive when we splashed into the lake. Murmurs rippled through the room as she described the ordeal in vivid detail. Her recollections, once private memories, now shaped the official record. "I didn't hear a mayday call from the flight deck," she said firmly. "No voice messages, no emergency declaration. It was as if the cockpit had gone silent." The airline's lead counsel shifted uneasily in his seat. Emma's eyes met his, unwavering. "Thank you, Ms. Sullivan," Captain Tremblay said, flipping a page in her notes. "You noted hearing a metal screech prior to loss of power. That could indicate compressor stall or control surface failure. We will correlate your testimony with recovered flight data." Emma nodded and returned to her seat, exhaling deeply. I rose next, ready to supplement her account with details of the rescue operation. I spoke of the black box pings, the sight of her raft unfolding under the drone's lights, and the eerily solitary moment when I first held her pendant. The coordination between Coast Guard icebreakers, submersible drones, and inflatable boats was extraordinary, I explained. But without survivor testimony, the technical data alone would not reveal the human element, the decisions made under duress. I described how Emma's map guided us, how each footprint became a breadcrumb leading to her shelter. The assembly sat in rapt silence, absorbing our narrative. After our testimony, the TSB called several expert witnesses, a meteorologist who detailed the microburst potential over Lake Superior, an aerospace engineer who analyzed the wing's deformation patterns, and a life systems specialist who explained hypothermia thresholds and the critical importance of insulating materials in survival gear. Each expert reinforced a facet of our story, weaving together memory and measurement. By late afternoon, the formal hearings concluded. Captain Tremblay summarized the preliminary findings. A sudden microburst had overwhelmed the aircraft's climb capability. The absence of a mayday call suggested rapid instrument failure, and a design review of the canopy release mechanism was recommended to prevent inadvertent activation during turbulence. She also praised Emma's testimony as instrumental in filling gaps that only human experience can illuminate. As the room emptied, Emma and I lingered. The airline's counsel approached, extending a measured apology and expressing a commitment to safety enhancements. We accepted it graciously, mindful of the larger goal, systemic change rather than retribution. Outside, the winter sun was low, casting long shadows across the snow-covered courtyard. Emma exhaled, the tension draining from her shoulders. "It's done," she whispered. "We've spoken our truth." I nodded, pride and relief sweeping through me. "That chapter is closed," I said softly. "And now begins the next, healing." As we walked to the car, side by side, I realized that the hearing had transformed our private trauma into public accountability. We had given voice to the lost and living alike, and in doing so, forged a path towards safer skies for every traveler who would follow. The days following the hearing felt surreal, like living inside a snow globe where every flake of memory drifted slowly, suspended between past and present. Emma and I returned home to an echoing silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and distant traffic. Our living room looked the same, yet everything had changed. The once comforting photographs on the mantel now reminded me of the night of January 18th, 2025. The family portrait of 4 smiling faces framed by winter coats, my arm around Emma's shoulder as we left for Winnipeg. I found myself drawn to the partial fragments of wreckage Captain Tremblay had arranged for personal inspection. A warped section of wing skin, a gouged piece of aluminum, and a bent cabin frame with faint traces of blood. They sat on a folding table in our dining room, sterile under the bright lamp. Each piece was a puzzle fragment, evidence of the violent forces that had torn the aircraft apart, scattering them across the ice. Emma emerged from her room, still wrapped in a thick sweater though the heaters ran constantly. Her hair, once matted with ice, now fell loosely around her face. She looked at the debris, then at me. "I don't know if I can look at these every day," she said softly. I nodded. "But they tell part of your story, the proof of your survival." I picked up the cabin frame, turning it over in gloved hands. "See here," I said, pointing to a jagged tear. "This is where the fuselage ruptured." The metal's edges were sharp, buckled inward as though clawed by invisible hands. Emma's fingers traced the tear. "That's where I crawled through," she whispered, eyes distant. "I climbed out of the wreckage right there." A shiver ran through her, not from cold but from the memory. I closed my eyes, recalling her description, half submerged in freezing water, adrenaline fueling each movement until exhaustion overtook her. We spent the afternoon documenting each piece, photographing under magnification, sketching outlines, and labeling with date and location coordinates. The process was painstaking but necessary to preserve every detail for the official investigation and for our family's own record. It felt like exhuming ghosts. With each flash of the camera, the past pressed closer. That evening, our mother arrived with homemade soup and fresh bread. She took in the sight of the wreckage and sighed, her shoulders sagging. "You don't have to do this alone," she said, setting bowls on the table. Emma and I exchanged a glance. The work was grueling, but shared steps made the load lighter. Over bowls of steaming soup, we talked of lighter things: spring's promise, a planned family ski trip, Emma's art exhibition scheduled for next month. The conversation flowed around the debris, as if it existed in another room. It was a small triumph, proof that life could resume its rhythms even amid broken fragments. The next morning brought a package, the restored pages of Emma's sketchbook, now dry and flattened beneath clear acrylic sheets. I carried them to her studio, a sunlit room filled with easels and paint-splattered floorboards. Emma stood at her workstation, brush in hand, as I laid out each page. The drawings ranged from maps of the crash site to quick portraits of crew members she'd seen through the raft's clear canopy. She studied them, eyes widening. "These are incredible," she breathed. "I'd thought they were lost forever." She touched the acrylic gently. "Seeing them now, I feel like I can tell the story, not just in words, but in color and form." Over the next days, Emma immersed herself in painting. She converted her sketches into large canvases. One captured the microburst hitting the wing, another depicted the raft blooming like a flower in the darkness of the lake, and a third portrayed her kneeling by the three rocks, sketchbook in hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. Each brushstroke was a step toward reclaiming her narrative, transforming trauma into art. I watched her from the doorway, awe mingling with relief. Her work would become part of a traveling exhibition on aviation safety and survivor resilience, curated by the TSB and several art institutions. In sharing her journey visually, she offered hope and warning in equal measure. Weeks later, the official TSB preliminary report was released. The press conference streamed live, with Captain Tremblay summarizing key findings: unexpected microburst downburst, possible sensor blockage by supercooled water, and a canopy release mechanism vulnerable to high-pressure airflow. Recommendations included revised pilot training on microburst response, redesigned canopy latches with safety interlocks, and improved onboard weather radar algorithms. As we watched the live stream, Emma squeezed my hand. "They listened," she said quietly. Our testimony and her artistry had shaped these recommendations. Engineers, pilots, and regulators would revise procedures to honor our ordeal and prevent another tragedy. When the conference ended, I led Emma to her studio. We stood before her paintings, the debris photos, and her restored sketches. The room felt alive with memory and possibility. She turned to me, eyes bright. "What do you think?" she asked. I swallowed, heart full. "I think your story will change the world, one stroke, one recommendation, one survivor at a time." She smiled, and for the first time since January, I felt something lighter than grief. The promise of renewal forged from fractured pieces. The first whisper of spring arrived on gentle breezes that carried the scent of thawing earth and budding maple sap. In Toronto, ice melted from sidewalks in rivulets of melted snow, and robins sang tentative songs as they flitted between bare branches. For Emma and me, the change of season brought both relief and new challenges. Healing, like spring's thaw, was a process of slow, deliberate patience. Every morning, Emma rose before dawn to work in her studio, her paintings now framed and ready for the upcoming exhibition. I, meanwhile, reorganized my office to accommodate a new project, coordinating a survivors advocacy group dedicated to improving aviation safety and mental health support. Together we navigated these parallel paths, hers in art, mine in activism, each step forward a testament to resilience. One Tuesday evening, I found Emma curled up on the love seat, her eyes red-rimmed and weary. She clutched her sketchbook as if it were a talisman. "I can't stop thinking about them," she whispered, voice trembling. "The others who didn't make it. I feel guilty for surviving." I sank beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Survivor's guilt is real," I said gently. "But you honored them by telling the truth, by fighting for change. You carry their stories with you, and that's powerful." She leaned into me, resting her head against my chest. We sat in silence, listening to the hum of traffic outside and the quiet creak of the old house settling. In that stillness, I realized that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning to live alongside its echoes. 2 weeks later, the Survivors Advocacy Group held its first meeting in a bright conference room at City Hall. Row upon row of chairs, filled with faces marked by sorrow and hope, family members, rescued passengers, and even airline personnel who had lost colleagues. I stood at the podium, hands trembling slightly, as I welcomed everyone. "Thank you all for being here," I began. "We come together not to dwell on tragedy, but to ensure it never happens again. Today, we launch Wings of Change, Survivors United. Our mission is threefold: to advocate for stronger safety protocols, to provide peer support for survivors and families, and to partner with mental health professionals to address trauma." A woman in the front row, a fellow survivor, raised her hand. "How can we help?" she asked. I smiled, relief and purpose filling me. "By sharing your experiences, by offering solidarity, and by helping us shape policy recommendations. You are the true experts." As the meeting continued, I watched Emma slip into the crowd, her presence quiet but steady. Later, she approached me with a folder of her paintings. "I want to donate the piece Raft in the Dark to our group," she said. "Let it hang in your office as a reminder of what we and so many others survived." I accepted it with gratitude, envisioning the canvas's bright orange canopy unfolding against a somber backdrop, a symbol of hope amid despair. Meanwhile, Emma grappled with the shadows of her trauma. Some nights she woke in a cold sweat, the roar of wind and shudder of metal replaying in her dreams. The life systems specialist from the hearing had recommended regular therapy sessions, and she began meeting weekly with a counselor who specialized in post-traumatic stress. Each session was an expedition into her own mind, untangling fear from memory, learning grounding exercises to calm her racing heart when nightmares struck, and slowly reclaiming the simple pleasures of daily life. Over mugs of chamomile tea, she confided in me one afternoon, "I never thought I'd laugh again without feeling like I'm betraying what happened." I squeezed her hand. "You're not betraying anyone," I reminded her. "You're living, and that's what they would have wanted." Gradually, her laughter returned, first in small tremors as she watched a comedy sketch, then in full-bodied mirth at family dinners. The sound was healing for both of us, a reminder that joy and grief could coexist. In late April, the art exhibition Resilience in Flight opened at the Royal Ontario Museum. Emma's canvases lined the gallery walls, each accompanied by a brief narrative of her experience. Visitors moved through the space in hushed reverence. A former pilot traced the lines of the microburst painting with his eyes. A young student paused before the raft image, tears welling. An engineer stood in front of the canopy painting, scribbling notes. I watched Emma stand by her work, fielding questions and accepting compliments with grace. She wore a simple black dress, her dark hair pinned back to reveal the contours of her face, soft from recovery, yet edged with strength. When the museum director invited her to speak, she stepped forward, voice steady. "Art allowed me to process what happened," she told the crowd. "Each painting was a step in my journey back to myself. I hope these images remind you that survivors carry both scars and wings, and that together we can transform tragedy into change." The audience erupted in applause, and I felt tears prick my eyes. tears of pride, of relief, of wonder at the transformation wrought by time, love, and purpose. Back home that night we sat on the porch, the city lights twinkling beyond the cherry blossoms in bloom. The air was warm, a gentle contrast to the bone-deep cold we had endured. Emma leaned her head on my shoulder. "I feel lighter," she said, "like the storm is finally passing." I kissed her temple. "You earned your wings," I whispered, and now we soar. As we watched the stars emerge above the skyline, I knew our journey was far from over. There would be memorials to attend, policy meetings to convene, and the steady work of advocacy and healing. But in that moment, we allowed ourselves to believe in spring's promise, that from the frozen depths of tragedy, life could and would bloom anew. Weeks of anxious waiting culminated on a crisp morning in mid-May, when a discreet courier delivered the Transport Safety Board's preliminary digital report, and alongside it, a secure invitation to witness the transcript readout of the cockpit voice recorder. The auditorium at the TSB lab in Ottawa was small and plain, its rows of chairs facing a dais where 3 investigators sat behind microphones. The air smelled faintly of coffee and printed paper, an antiseptic calm pervading the space. Emma and I took our seats in the second row, our hearts pounding like twin engines revving for takeoff. Captain Claire Tremblay opened the session with polite formality. "Thank you for joining us," she said, voice steady. "Today, we will play the transcript of Flight AC237's cockpit voice recorder. We remind all present that the contents may be distressing." She glanced at Emma and me with empathy before nodding to her colleague, who pressed a button. A hush fell. The speakers crackled, then a female voice, pilot in command, Captain Martin, breathing heavily. "We've encountered severe turbulence," she said, tone urgent but controlled. "Brace for potential downdraft." There was a pause, a shudder in her words. "Second officer, report status." A male voice responded, strained. "Engines at altitude lost. V1 speed dropping, gear down." Another pause, punctuated by the whine of alarms. "Altitude. I'm going. Followed by abrupt silence and a flatline beep. Emma's hand tightened around mine. I swallowed hard, the room's fluorescent lights feeling suddenly harsh. The voices had matched her memory. No Mayday call, no Mayday, Mayday. Only a clinical exchange of readings and commands, cut off too quickly to contain fear. Captain Tremblay switched off the recording. She offered tissues to Emma and me. "We have the metadata," she explained. "The last recorded voice came at 0.0347, just 3 seconds before radar lost signal." She drew a line on the graph behind her, the altitude curve plunging almost vertically in that final moment. The combination of a microburst and sudden thrust loss created a downburst that exceeded the aircraft's performance limits. The flight data recorder corroborates this sequence. I pressed my lips together. "Was there any indication of icing on sensors or pitot tubes?" I asked. Emma watched my lips, her eyes wide but determined. Tremblay nodded. "Post-recovery analysis shows ice crystals had formed on the pitot-static system, obstructing airspeed data. The autopilot disengaged. The pilots had to fly manually in zero visibility. The microburst strike happened too quickly to recover. Their last actions, to lower the gear, to counteract the roll, were appropriate but insufficient." There was no blame in Tremblay's voice, only fact. Yet the facts cut deep. A design vulnerability in the drainage of the pitot system, a lack of real-time anti-ice override, and protocols that did not anticipate this compound failure. "Are there recommended changes?" I asked, sounding more like an advocate than a brother. Tremblay consulted her notes. "Yes, we propose redesigned heating elements for pitot sensors, redundant airspeed indications sourced from alternate probes, and enhanced crew training on manual control in severe ice conditions. We also recommend the canopy release mechanism design be reviewed to prevent accidental deployment under high aerodynamic loads." Emma exhaled. relief mingling with sorrow. "At least their voices aren't lost," she whispered. "We know what happened." After the session ended, we lingered to speak privately with the investigators. I asked about timelines, how long until full certification of the new sensor systems, and what oversight was needed to ensure compliance across the industry. Tremblay assured us regulators were already drafting airworthiness directives, with provisional guidelines to be published within 3 months. Outside the TSB building, the late spring sun warmed our faces. A gentle breeze rustled the maple leaves newly unfurled on nearby trees, the same kind of greenery that would soon line the highways and suburbs. Emma pressed a copy of the hearing transcript into my hand. On the cover, beneath the TSB logo, it read, "Human factors and technical findings of Flight AC237. Together we'll make sure no one else has to endure this," I said, voice firm. Emma nodded, eyes bright. Back in Toronto, we convened with Wings of Change members in a glass-walled conference room overlooking Lake Ontario. The full preliminary report formed the backbone of our policy recommendations, mandating routine pitot system inspections in winter routes, incorporating ice accumulation simulations into flight simulators, and requiring airlines to upgrade legacy fleets with the proposed sensor enhancements. Our survivor testimonies, Emma's vivid details of the screech and the silent cockpit, were cited in every section, humanizing the data. A pilot union representative leaned forward. "Your advocacy has given us the technical ammunition to lobby Transport Canada," he said. "You've bridged the gap between emotion and regulation." Emma and I exchanged a look of pride. Her sketches, my coordination of survivors, both had converged here in this boardroom to shape the future of aviation safety. That evening, we hosted a small gathering at our home for close supporters, family, friends, and a handful of aviation experts. The living room, once filled with debris, fragments, and TSB reports, was now decorated with Emma's paintings and photos from the hearings. Glasses of sparkling cider clinked as toasts were made to survivors, to advocates, and to those we lost. I raised my glass to Emma. "To truth," I said, "and to those who speak it." She smiled, eyes glistening. "To hope," she added. In that moment, the weight of winter's darkness felt further behind us. The black boxes had spoken, and their secrets had galvanized change. Yet our work would continue, because safety is never finished, and vigilance must be constant. As the stars emerged over the city skyline, I realized that the true rescue was ongoing, a rescue of memory, of accountability, and of the promise that from tragedy we would build safer skies for all. The dawn of early June brought unseasonal warmth to Toronto, skies a pale cerulean, the air heavy with humidity and the promise of summer. Yet inside our family home, a different kind of heat burned, the quiet intensity of purpose. Emma and I rose before the sun to prepare for a meeting at Transport Canada's headquarters, where we would present our coalition's formal recommendations for regulatory changes. The weight of months of testimony, technical analysis, and advocacy coalesced into this single day. I packed my briefcase with printed binders, one containing Wings of Change's policy proposals, another with binders of supporting materials, Emma's sketches and paintings, the TSB's preliminary report, transcripts of the cockpit voice recorder, and letters from survivors. Each document represented a piece of the larger puzzle, a fragment of evidence demanding action. Emma, dressed in a navy blazer and crisp white blouse, carried a portfolio of her art prints. "These images help illustrate the human impact," she said, her voice calm but determined. "When they see the raft painting, they understand this isn't just data on paper, this was real." I nodded, grateful for her unwavering clarity. Her art had become an indispensable bridge between sterile statistics and lived experience. By mid-morning, we stood in the lobby of the Transport Canada building, its glass facade reflecting the bright sky. A receptionist directed us to conference room 12B, where a dozen officials awaited. representatives from Transport Canada's Civil Aviation Directorate, safety investigators, and seasoned regulators. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and brewing coffee. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting geometric patterns across the long oak table. We exchanged polite greetings and took our seats at the head of the table. I introduced our team: survivors, aviation engineers, legal counsel, and Emma, whose experience and artwork would bring the human dimension to our technical arguments. "Thank you all for convening on such short notice," I began. "We appreciate Transport Canada's commitment to aviation safety." I paused, letting the gravity of the moment settle. "We're here to propose 3 categories of changes: technical upgrades, procedural reforms, and enhanced support mechanisms for survivors." I clicked a remote and a projector flickered to life. The first slide displayed a photo of the pitot static probe recovered from Flight AC237, its heating element charred and its exterior iced over. Beside it, Emma's painting of the cockpit in darkness. She had captured the sense of disorientation with broad, dark strokes, contrasted by narrow beams of light coming from the instruments. "Technical Recommendation 1, I said, mandates that all commercial aircraft operating in northern climates be retrofitted with redesigned, self-regulating pitot heating elements capable of clearing supercooled moisture instantaneously, preventing sensor blockage. Second, we recommend integrated redundancy. Alternate pitot probes connected to independent wiring harnesses, ensuring continuous airspeed data even if one system fails." I clicked to a chart showing failure rates of conventional pitot systems below, 20°C, juxtaposed with simulated performance of the proposed redesign. These measures can reduce sensor icing incidents by over 90%. A senior regulator nodded thoughtfully and jotted notes. I turned to Emma, who advanced to the next slide. Her painting of the orange raft unfolding, bathed in the drone's beams beneath the inky water. At the bottom, a short caption she had written: "Clarity in darkness is as vital as equipment. Without human input, machines alone cannot tell the full story." She spoke softly, voice resonant. This image symbolizes the critical gap between instrument readings and human perception. When the pilots lost reliable airspeed indications, they lacked both the data and the context to understand the nature of the microburst. Our second set of recommendations addresses procedures and training. She clicked to a flowchart illustrating enhanced pilot protocols, immediate manual flying training, revised checklist sequences for potential icing events, and microburst recognition simulations using virtual reality modules that replicate sudden downdraft dynamics. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the projector. A Transport Canada engineer raised a hand. "These simulations, have they been tested in certified flight simulators?" she asked. Emma smiled. "We're partnering with the University of Waterloo's Aerospace Lab. They've developed a VR-based microburst simulator proven to reduce pilot response times by 40% in trials." Data appeared on screen, bar graphs showing reduced reaction delays and improved decision-making scores among test pilots. I resumed the presentation. "Our third category, support mechanisms, ensures survivors and families receive timely, comprehensive care. We propose mandatory post-accident care plans that include psychological counseling, financial advisory services, and an ombudsman to guide survivors through the investigative and legal processes." A Transport Canada official leaned forward. "How would this be funded?" he asked. I clicked to a bar chart detailing the allocation. A sliding scale funded jointly by airlines' mandatory insurance premiums and a federal safety fund, offset by projected long-term savings in reduced litigation and improved public trust. As the meeting progressed, questions grew more detailed and technical, exactly the engagement we had hoped for. By the end, the room buzzed with constructive dialogue rather than bureaucratic inertia. The lead regulator concluded, Your proposals are comprehensive and well substantiated. Transport Canada will evaluate them for inclusion in our upcoming regulatory updates. We anticipate releasing a notice of proposed amendment within 3 months. Emma and I exchanged relieved smiles. Our months of relentless work, testimony, advocacy, art had culminated in concrete momentum toward change. That evening back home, we celebrated with quiet gratitude. Over simple pasta and garlic bread, we reflected on the day's triumph. Survivors who once sat in hospital corridors hoping for one another to be found had now stood before regulators shaping the skies of tomorrow. Emma poured a glass of wine and raised it. "To fragile hope," she said. "May it endure." I clinked my glass against hers. "And to the strength we found in each other," I added. As the stars glimmered outside our window, I realized that hope, like glass, could be fragile, easily shattered by the weight of grief and fear. But when tempered by resolve and guided by purpose, it became resilient. From the ice-choked depths of Lake Superior to the polished halls of government, our journey had forged something new, not only safer skies, but a living testament to the power of human agency. Summer arrived in full force, painting Toronto's skyline in shades of emerald and gold. The days stretched long and warm, a striking contrast to the frozen night that had once threatened to claim Emma's life. As cicadas began their evening chorus, our family home became a sanctuary of laughter, conversation, and quiet reflection. Proof that life can flourish again after the most bitter winter. I found Emma one morning on the back deck, sunlight dappling her sketchbook as she worked on a new series of drawings. These weren't depictions of tragedy, but of rebirth. A fledgling bird breaking from its shell, hands releasing paper cranes into a summer breeze, a group of hands joined around a glowing lantern. I joined her, coffee in hand, and watched the soft lines of charcoal take form on the creamy page. "How does it feel?" I asked gently. She paused, looking up with a serene smile. "Liberating," she said. "These images are about survival's gift, the chance to grow beyond our scars." That afternoon, we convened at the Art Gallery of Ontario for the official launch of Beyond the Ice: Art of Resilience, a curated exhibition combining Emma's work with photographs and artifacts from the Flight AC237 investigation. The gallery's great hall was bathed in natural light streaming through the glass roof, illuminating canvases and display cases arranged along a winding path. Visitors moved deliberately, pausing before the centerpiece installation, a suspended sculpture of folded aluminum panels collected from the wreckage, transformed into a pair of abstract wings. Beneath it lay Emma's painting of the unfolding raft, its bright orange canopy echoing the metallic sheen above. I stood beside Emma as the gallery director delivered her opening remarks. "This exhibition is a testament to human strength," she said. "From the depths of Lake Superior to the heights of advocacy and healing, these works remind us that resilience is more than survival. It is transformation." As applause rippled through the hall, Emma and I exchanged a glance heavy with shared history. In that moment, every hardship, the cold, the fear, the months of testimony and lobbying, felt woven into a single tapestry of meaning. In the weeks that followed, Wings of Change held its annual symposium, welcoming international delegates from aviation authorities across North America and Europe. We presented data on regulatory progress in Canada, shared survivor narratives, including Emma's, and hosted workshops on human factors in aviation safety. The turnout exceeded expectations, and by the symposium's close, several jurisdictions had committed to adopting our recommended sensor upgrades and training protocols. On the final evening, delegates and survivors gathered on a rooftop terrace overlooking Lake Ontario. String lights swayed overhead, and the city's silhouette shimmered in the twilight. Emma stood at the railing, gazing out at the water's surface. I joined her, the warmth of the evening wrapping around us like a promise. "I never thought our journey would reach this," she said softly. "Influencing policy overseas. inspiring others to share their stories. I slipped an arm around her waist. You gave voice to the voiceless, I reminded her. Your art and your courage created ripples far beyond our family. She smiled, leaning into me. And you, your resolve turned ripples into waves. Back home, late summer evenings found us hosting barbecues in the backyard. The laughter of friends and family mingled with the scent of grilling vegetables and cedar smoke. Children chased each other around the lawn, their carefree joy a balm to wounds old and new. Our parents, once haunted by fear, now embraced these gatherings with a newfound exuberance, delighting in the simple pleasure of shared meals and stories. One evening, as fireflies flickered among the flower beds, our father raised a glass of iced tea. To life, he declared, voice thick with emotion, to family, and to Emma and her brother, who taught us that hope can thaw even the coldest depths. Glasses clinked, and I felt a rush of gratitude. Every step, diving into rescue operations, testifying under harsh lights, rallying regulators and creating art, had led us here. To warmth, to community, to a future we had once feared lost. Autumn approached with its riot of color, and Emma prepared to teach her first guest workshop on art therapy for trauma survivors. I coordinated with Wings of Change to establish a scholarship fund for students pursuing studies in aviation safety or counseling, an enduring legacy of our journey. In quiet moments, I would walk along the lakeshore, remembering the night of the crash, the howl of wind, the sting of ice, the agony of uncertainty. And then I would look up at migrating geese carving V-shaped formations against the sky and feel a kinship with their determined flight. On the anniversary of Flight AC237's rescue, our family gathered at the Memorial of Remembrance, a small cairn of stones by the lake, engraved with the names of those lost. We lit candles and placed bouquets of wildflowers at the base. Emma sketched the scene in charcoal, the flickering flames, the gentle lapping of waves, the hopeful faces of survivors and families united. When she finished, she turned to me and handed me the sketch. "For you," she said, "so you remember why we do this." I held the drawing close, tears pricking my eyes. "Always," I whispered. As dusk settled, we stood together in silence, the names etched in stone beneath our feet and the stars shimmering overhead. The lake's vast expanse stretched before us, a reminder of how small we once felt, adrift in icy waters, and how far we had come. In the hush, I sensed not the echo of tragedy but the resonance of triumph, of hearts unbroken, of wings unfurled, and of lives renewed.